because her crit ratio is just out of whack and meant for one specific thing. And unlike a character like Noelle, she doesn't have an ability that converts all this defense she's building for some of her abilities into attack that then her other abilities can benefit from. So these other non-scaling defense abilities are basically worthless when you build her for shields or her C6. So how do you buff her without just making her Noelle 2.0? I think there's various ways you could approach this, but what I would personally like, and that many people probably would not like, is leaning into the C6, the Spin Yan build. I'd take her C1, I'd make it charge attack exclusive and make it stack multiple times, maybe as much as up to even 3 or 4 times for a 36 to 48% charge attack speed buff, which may sound absurd to you. That is an insane amount of attack speed that only really Razor has access to. But charge attacks are limited with poor mobility, and there's also hit lag you have to consider that reduces the effectiveness of this attack speed, because hit lag will slow that down. Next up, I'd add a line to either her shields itself or her A4 passive that says Xin Yan's charge attack startup delay is drastically reduced, just like Beto's A4 passive. If you've used this, it feels a lot smoother, and quite frankly, I feel like all Claymore charge attacks should have this built in, but whatever. It's probably not going to happen. Charge attacks are just in a rough place. You either got a godly one, or it's just garbage. Sometimes, even fancy garbage. And again, just fix her shield, which is apparently broken. I'm not going to play her to find out. And lastly, Barbara. All the things I said about Chi-Chi earlier about healers and their place in the game overall still hold true here. She's a dedicated healer that's not the best, and I mean, she's a 4-star unit. Everyone has access to her. She is a good healer, but that is all she is. Unlike Chi-Chi, she doesn't really have any kind of way to deal damage. Her auto attacks are not great, her burst does nothing, and her skill is, I don't even know why it does damage anyway. But much like Chi-Chi, she cannot generate energy for her team, so let's change that. Unfortunately, she only does damage on the startup of her skill, which is melee range, so sometimes it may not even be possible or reasonable to get this, but oh well, something is better than nothing. And speaking of that skill, let's increase the range of Barbara's Hydro Aura significantly and increase the frequency of Hydro application so she has a potentially viable role as a Hydro applicator. If it's going to freeze us all the time, we may as well get something more meaningful than just a little bit of minor healing out of it. On top of these changes, I would shave as much as 12 seconds off the cooldown of her skill. 32 seconds is insane for a skill. 12 might be a little bit overkill, so 7 might be a bit more reasonable, but Barbara isn't breaking the game anytime soon. Having a 75% uptime healing isn't nearly as broken as never taking damage in the first place from a 100% uptime shield from Zhongli, or even potentially Toma now, a fellow 4-star. And a quick speed round for minor buffs that I think some characters could use but are overall in a decent spot in some way, shape, or form. Lisa, reduce the charge time for her skill to be fully charged. Klee, reduce the cast time of her burst. It eats into your support's buff significantly, like Bennett or Xingqiu. It's too long. Yoimiya, allow her burst to mark and damage multiple enemies, not just one. Ningguang, make her burst projectiles pass through terrain so constructs and cramped spaces like caves don't obliterate her burst damage. Aloy, remove the ICD internal cooldown on her skill stacks. Albedo, just add some natural defense scaling on his burst. Right now, the way you build him, you basically choose which ability you want to focus on, and the other one will always be pretty much worthless. Noelle, much like Chi-Chi and Barbara, just make her shield generate some energy if the startup hits an enemy. Jean, increase the pull strength of her skill. And finally, Kokomi. Instead of her burst refreshing her jellyfish's initial duration, just make it add 12 seconds so it's not so specific on the timing. You could even just cap this at like a max of 18 seconds or something. Just make it a little bit more usable. That's all for now. I can honestly think of dozens of more buffs I would like or that I would want, but these are the ones that I think are most pressing, especially for the initial 4 characters. Buffs can come in a lot of different ways. They can come indirectly, like in the case of the new artifact set we're getting is easily going to be a new best in slot for Albedo, potentially a new best in slot for Noelle. We didn't really have any dedicated geo damage set, period, let alone one specifically for defense users. We've also had indirect nerfs and buffs in the past, like Corrosion was obviously an indirect buff to all healers. The Nobushi Samurai, they were initially an indirect nerf to Venti. Basically all of Inazuma was an indirect